Thank you for publishing your book. It is so needed. Rock on, mining for joy in the deep river of sibling grief. I mean, that sums up it a lot for a lot of people. Can you give us some background about why you wrote this book, what inspired you to do it?
Sure. So my younger brother, he was 43 at the time. His name is Brian, but we called him Rocky. That was his nickname, hence the title, Rock On. And it was in Valentine's Day of 2014, and he was over in Hong Kong. He was traveling with his wife and 3.5-year-old daughter, and he was going to be joining a team to open spas for the Rosewood hotels throughout Asia. And they tacked on a family vacation, and he did not feel well flying there. And 3 days later, he was dead. And his brain swelled. He was in the hospital, and my sister-in-law is an anesthesiologist, so she had called the hospital, and they said, "Oh, he's withdrawing from Xanax because in 2011 he was in Cairo, Egypt, and they thought that he got some sort of a virus over there that caused vertigo, and they put him on Xanax. And Xanax is not meant to be a long-term medication, but he was on it for 3 years. They took him off it, and then he had a seizure on Wednesday morning, and then that Friday, the 14th, he died. And so, as I said, my sister-in-law had called over to the hospital, and they said he was just withdrawing from Xanax. So that's what happened, and it was one of the most tragic moments of my life.
Wow, it's very sudden.
Very sudden.
And your sibling.
And my sibling.
And then you decided to write about it, but not just a memoir about it.
Well, I'm a writer, and that's how I process everything in my life. And I started processing my grief on a blog. And, well, first of all, let me backtrack. My brother and I flew over to Asia, and we spent 3 weeks there. And it was a hellacious trip.
Your surviving brother?
My oldest brother.
At the time of your...
After my brother died.
Okay.
We went over there to meet my sister-in-law, get his body cremated, they lived in Bali, Indonesia, so we flew his ashes back to Bali. And I chronicled that whole trip. But then I spent months chronicling my grief on my blog. And so I had just decided that I started to write a book. And then I had looked for books on sibling grief. I couldn't find very many, and I was desperate, you know? And so I ended up, I've been in a writing group for 13 years, and I said, you know what? I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to interview siblings. And it really was sort of serendipitous the way it happened, because I thought, who is going to share their stories with me? Just open their heart wide and tell me about their siblings. But as soon as I got the word out, I had 17 people within 48 hours.
Oh, I believe it.
And I interviewed people all over the globe.
And this was when you were still fairly fresh in your...
Deep in grief.
Oh, my goodness. What was it like to interview all those people amid your own grief?
I cried for 3 years writing this book. I cried through every one of those interviews. And yet there was something so sacred about sharing in that with these strangers that I did not know, and how much they loved being able to talk about their siblings and how helpful they found those interviews. It was a very therapeutic process for both me and the person I interviewed. I became good friends with some of these people, and we're still in touch. And I think sibling grief is a different kind of loss, because I think it's minimized. Because I think when a sibling dies, people are very concerned about, of course, the surviving spouse, the kids, if the sibling was old enough to have a wife or a husband and kids, and also the parents. And so the siblings sort of like get lost in this, I have to be strong for everybody. I have to be strong for my parents. So it's a lonely walk. It's sort of a misnomer too, because every sibling I've talked to has felt that way, but at the very same time, I think it's a choice that we feel like we can't grieve openly, you know, because you feel like you're going to cause your parents more pain, or you feel like the spouse is the one that's really, really suffering because they just lost their spouse and their life partner, and their children just lost their parent. But a sibling, whether you're estranged or you have a really tight bond, there's nobody who knows you like your sibling, you know? And when you're close to your siblings, they know all your secrets that even the parents don't know, you know? And you grow up together. And so I'm sorry, I don't remember the author who wrote this, but it was said that when a sibling dies, the parents lose the past, the spouse loses the future, and a sibling loses both.
That is the absolute truth. Wow. What do you say to people who are grieving? Like, what do you recommend people can say to a sibling who's grieving?
You know, I think anybody who suffers a deep loss, I ran grief groups for children for 4 years after my brother died. And what I've learned about the grieving process is that what's important, and this might sound so cliche, is to allow yourself to feel it. And I think that, you know, grieving is not fun. It's incredibly dark. It's very painful. And at times it can feel incredibly hopeless. But it's just allowing that grieving process is what helps you get to the other side. And when I say that, I don't mean that, oh, you know, yay, I'm on the other side. Because you're going to carry that person that you've lost in your heart forever. And it is a gift to grieve, and it's a burden to grieve. It is both, because we have got this deep capacity to love. And without that, that's why we grieve so deeply. And I would never want to live this life if I weren't able to love. And so what I say is let yourself feel, talk to people. And for those who are trying to support somebody who's grieving, just listen. There's nothing you can do. Don't tell them they're in a better place, or all of these other things that people say that are not helpful. You know, it's not helpful. If I need to cry, I just need you to sit there and hold that space for me. That's it.
And you just touched upon two of, I think, the most challenging things in our society today. We don't know how to allow grief to be present.
Right.
And we don't know how to create the space for that kind of emotion to exist. We want to find a way to make everyone feel comfortable as fast as we can. And so too often it's like we set milestones and expect like that's going to mean it's done. The grief is now done.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a year, it's been 5 years, it's done.
People move on after 2 weeks out of your life, right? You have a death, and to no fault of the people who love us,
Right.
like they have to go on with their life. And what I found, this is personal, I don't know what it's like for everybody else out there, but there's something about a 4-month mark when I felt like I had hit a wall. And and then that 1 year, it's not the same acute grief, but things almost get harder before they get easier, because you come to this realization, I'm not going to see this person again. I'm really not.
Yeah.
You know, I can feel their spirit. I mean, you know, everybody has their own belief. I deeply believe our spirits live on. But I'm not gonna, you know, you're not gonna hug them again. You're not gonna be with them again. And, you know, my brother was in Bali, so I only got to see him a couple of times a year, but we would FaceTime and do all of those things.
Sure.
I could still, you know, sorry.
It's an emotional topic.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's an emotional topic. People talk about moving on, but it's more about moving forward, right?
I love that.
So there's your life that you had with them while they were alive, and there's a life that you have with them now that they are not alive.
Right.
And
you move forward with them in your spirit.
Right.
And I don't even know why I'm getting emotional, because, like I said, writing this book was so therapeutic, because it took me, like I said, three and a half years to write it. And that's what I meant by feeling the grief. I was in it and cried every day. And you know, one thing I can say about grief is, and I write about this, that it can either soften the heart or harden it. And for me, I wanna walk through this world with a soft heart and an open heart, and to love, even though I know that, you know, that loving will bring you pain someday.
Yeah.
But you gotta let yourself move through it. If not, you can get very angry and stuck. I'm also a mental health therapist, so I've dealt with, so I've also worked with people around trauma, grief, and loss too for many, many years.
So you have the background that helped equip you in many ways to be able to process this loss in a way. It doesn't diminish the loss, but it helps you cope with it and strategize it and maybe even help others.
I think what it did for me was, I think that being a therapist and working for 25 years in this field is that it gave me hope that I wouldn't feel this way forever, because it was terrifying. I mean, I'm a very optimistic person, and really try to live in joy. And it was so dark for so long, and I thought, if I am going to feel this way for the rest of my life, I don't want to live anymore. I wasn't suicidal, but I thought, if I can never feel joy again.
Right.
And so that's what I think my work gave me, was hope, that I will live again. I don't know how long it's going to take me, but I will live again.
Right.
And part of that was going to the Center for Grieving Children and running groups. And
so you channeled your grief and your energy and that hopefulness into helping others.
Right.
I think that is so important, what you said about it can harden your heart or soften your heart. And it's your choice which direction you choose to take on that.
And I know people who have stayed in a very angry place for 30 years.
Yeah.
And I think anger is easier in some ways. Well, anger and depression are the same, right? It's the same thing.
Same
One's
source.
internalized, one's externalized.
Right.
And I think it's easier to deal with anger than it is that intense pain, when you feel like your heart has broken wide open. And neither road is easy. But I do think taking that road of really feeling it helps you to move forward with that person in your heart. They want us to be joyful. They want us to live. Yeah. I mean, I think about my brother, and he'd just be like, he was so funny and so charismatic, and I could hear him sometimes, really, sis? Come on, come on. And because that's what he would do. He would make me laugh. And I just knew, even when I was crying, I'm like, he does not want me in this space.
Yeah. The grief story, especially the family grief story, is so unique. I'm sure there's presiding themes that you've come across, but do you feel comfortable talking about your own family and what that grief, the initial grief and then the later grief was like?
Yeah, so I had 4 brothers. I have 3 living now. And I was right smack in the middle. So Rocky and Kevin were my 2 younger brothers, and then my 2 older brothers, Jim and Paul. And so I also know this to be true, that men grieve in a very different way. And so here I was writing my book, and my brothers didn't talk about it. And my parents were just shattered. And then, of course, my sister-in-law was still over in Bali with my niece. And so, and this is another interesting thing, I also think grief can bring families closer. And the same thing, I think that they can get distance. And thankfully, I've got a grew up Italian Catholic family, and we're all very tight. And so that didn't happen, but it also wasn't this open dialogue with my brothers, but we would share stories with him. We still share we can share stories about him now and not cry. Yeah. But for a long time, it was sort of, let's all just pretend like maybe this isn't happening, But every year on the anniversary, we'd get together and drink his favorite beer and eat pizza. But it's just not, it's just so, it's like, your family gets together and there's this like missing piece, even though he wasn't with us all the time.
How essential are the ritual aspects, drinking your brother's favorite beer?
Oh gosh, I love to talk about ways to honor our loved ones. I mean, it's wonderful, I mean, when I eat a French fry, I think of my brother. I mean, he loved junk food, pizza and hot dogs and French fries and all of that stuff. And and of course, then he was the director of a spa. It was really hilarious. I mean, there was such a dichotomy. It was such a dichotomy. But But, I'm sorry, what was your question?
The rituals.
Oh, the rituals. Yeah, I can go right off on tangents. So the rituals, I tell people, do whatever you can that honors the spirit of the person that you love. Climb their favorite mountain, cook their favorite meal, read their favorite book, go visit a place that they always wanted to travel but never could go to. Like for me, writing this book was my deepest honor to him and my blog. And I think just telling his stories, keeping him very much alive. But I think those rituals are so important. Whatever you can do where you feel like you're honoring that human that enriched your lives in all of these different ways, you know?
And does that help when you are feeling the dark moments, like the deep part of the grief? Does turning to a ritual like that help? Because I think many of us would be more inclined to be like, no, I'm not going to go there because that's going to deepen the grief. But does it do the opposite?
Well, just to be clear, I talk to my brother every single day.
Okay.
Like, I have dialogues with him. And today I said, okay, Rocky, you help me. Don't let me cry during this interview. But apparently he wasn't listening. But I do. And my mom passed a year ago in March. And so I feel like they're together and they're with me. I just feel that. And even if, their spirits aren't walking beside me, they're so deep in my heart. I can hear them. I can talk to them. I know what they would say to me.
So many people have expressed that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to have that ongoing connection, real or imagined.
Doesn't matter.
It's your personal.
It's my
your personal connection.
Yeah. I interviewed someone who texts his sister. He texts her every day. And I'm like, you get a text back yet? He's like, no, not yet, but I'll let you know if I do.
Talking about, you mentioned someone that you had just, that you interviewed. Are there any stories that are just so, you became friends with some of these people?
Yeah.
Are there any stories that you feel comfortable sharing that?
I feel comfortable sharing any one of them, but I can tell you the ones that walk with me.
Okay.
So Kim and Kay, they were sisters, best friends. And Kay was 50 years old and she was getting ready to leave a very abusive marriage. And on her way out, he shot her and he killed her. And then he killed himself. And so Kim also, we met because she had read my blog, how we ended up meeting, because she also has a blog to help women who are in abusive relationships to get out of them. Okay. And so she and I became good friends, and it was a touching story because her world was so dark for so long, and she did the same thing. She took that darkness and she channeled it into light, into helping others. And her sister donated her organs, and those organs live in these other people now who have written letters. She has helped numerous women get out of horrible relationships. And so, Kay's voice and her spirit live on in this way that are transforming lives. And I think that those were some of the most powerful stories when people took this darkness in their life and they really turned it into light to help people. And this other woman, Yvonne, who lives over in the Netherlands, she lost her brother to suicide. He jumped in front of a train. So these stories sound so tragic. And when I was writing these stories, I'm like, this is the darkest book ever, right? And then as I really wrote my way through it, I started to see the lightness in it, what people did with their loss, the hope that lived inside those stories. And I think that's it for me. It's the hope. It's what are you going to grow in the space that they've left behind,
Well, we need
no matter what it is.
What you've created with your book is a place for those stories to be shared, those hard stories that we need to break through our comfort zones and allow them the space to exist, because those stories exist very personally for the people who experience them.
And grief is universal.
Grief is universal, and not that we can ever assume to measure someone else's grief, but when you lose someone in that violent way, I mean, where
That's
do
right.
you go? Like, because you can go very dark,
Yeah.
and maybe and that's okay too for a little while, but please come back and live your life.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the most powerful stories I heard was a young woman, Janine, who lost her, I think Ryan was 33 when he died. He was at a bar and he was standing up he was with some friends. They were having like, pre-wedding party or something, and these two very drunk men were harassing the women. And he stood up to protect, he just said, stop harassing the women, and they stabbed him. And they stabbed him, and he died. And Ryan was Janine's only sibling, and she was so angry. I mean, angry, like it was ripping her apart.
I get that.
And then one day she said, I was in the shower, and I heard my brother say to me, don't let them do this to you. They've taken too much already. And she said at that moment, she felt this utter calm. I got chills. Utter calm come over her body. And she was able to let that anger go and really think about what she wanted to do with her life.
Beautiful.
It's powerful.
Yeah. Those are the stories that we need
Those
to
are the
share.
stories.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so not everyone is going to go write a book
Yeah.
or have a blog or teach wellness classes on how to process your grief. But the message is find a way to process your grief, right?
Yeah, this isn't going to heal your grief. That's not
Right.
what this is about. This is about you're not alone.
Yeah.
If all of us can survive and do this, you can too. Whether it's your child, your spouse, your sibling, your mom, your dad. It's not about comparing losses. It's about walking through this world with your own journey and knowing that it's possible to feel joyful again.
Well, we're going to have information in the credits where
Okay.
people can find out more information about you
Great.
and your website.
Great.
What is your website?
SusanECasey.com.
Easy.
Easy.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
We're running short on time already, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just want to thank you. Like, I will talk about sibling loss or grief anytime anyone will let me. So thank you for giving me this incredible opportunity. And I feel grateful and honored. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's deeply, as you know, personal. To me, this book is needed, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. It's
Thank
so
you.
important, and it will help a lot of people.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for being here today.
Thanks.